Biography. Sylvia Plath was a 20th century poet, and she was considered an important poet of the post-World War II era. Sylvia was born on October 27, 1932 in Boston, Massachusetts, to Otto Plath and Ariel Schober. Sylvia's father was diagnosed with diabetes mellitus when Sylvia was 8 years old. He was in denial about his disease, so when he got an infection in his foot, he refused medical treatment and the infection spread, which resulted in his death on November 5, 1940. Sylvia was deeply affected by her father's death, and this is evident in many of her poems. Plath started writing poetry at a young age, and she published her first pieces of poetry in 17 magazine and the Christian Science Monitor. She went to college at Smith College, where she ended up graduating from top of her class in 1955. Sylvia strived for perfection throughout school, and she always had high standards for herself, so when she couldn't meet those standards, it affected her greatly. Sylvia became depressed while she was in college, and her depression never truly went away. Throughout Sylvia's life, she experienced a great deal of pain, and she used words to cope with what she was going through. Plath's writings reflect the hardships she faced, the insecurities that ate away at her, and the demons that constantly haunted her mind. Depression and death. You would think that Sylvia's depression would affect her want to write, but it did the exact opposite. Sylvia enjoyed writing about her innermost thoughts and feelings. It helped her cope with things she was dealing with and the overwhelming sadness she felt consumed by. Many critics have said that reading Sylvia's poetry is like reading her personal diary. One of the things I found most interesting about Sylvia was that she was comfortable with the thought of dying. Sylvia mentions death in almost all of her poems. Critic Irving Howe says that Sylvia exists in some mediate province between living and dying, and she appears to be balancing coolly the claims of the two, drawn almost equally to both, yet oddly comfortable with the perils of where she is. Sylvia's acceptance of death is why she wrote some of her most successful poems. I believe that Sylvia's depression allowed her to view death differently than most people, and she wanted others to see things from her point of view. She wanted readers to step inside her shoes and see what it was like to be drowning in depression. Ted Hughes and the Ariel Collection. In 1956, Sylvia Plath met poet Ted Hughes, and they married shortly after meeting. They had 2 children together, but their marriage didn't last long because of an affair Ted was having with another woman. The end of the marriage took an emotional toll on Sylvia, but it also inspired her to write some of her most famous poems. Ted and Sylvia separated in September of 1962, and on the morning of October 1st, 1962, Sylvia woke around 4 and went into her study at Court Green and worked on her poetry for several hours until her children woke up around 8. This became Sylvia's constant work pattern for the next few weeks, which began a series of poems that would forever change her legacy in American literature. Ariel was the title Sylvia gave to this series of poems. She wrote with great determination and speed because she was extremely hurt, and she was channeling all of her pain and anger into writing poetry. During this time, Sylvia wrote 2 of her most famous poems, one of them being Daddy and the other being Lady Lazarus. Lady Lazarus. Sylvia wrote the poem Lady Lazarus shortly after her first suicide attempt. This poem is about Sylvia's suicide attempt and how she rose above it. It is also about the men in her life, such as Ted Hughes and her father, that she could never put in the past and move forward from. In line 21 of the poem, Sylvia writes, "And like the cat I have 9 times to die," because Sylvia felt like she was indestructible after surviving her suicide attempt. In lines 43 through 45, Sylvia writes, "Dying is an art, like everything else. I do it exceptionally well." I interpreted this to mean that Sylvia wasn't good at living her life to the fullest. Depression had broken her, and a part of her had begun to die. Michelle Herman, an undergraduate that analyzed this poem, said, "By tempting death and surviving, she little by little exorcises the demon of her father." Plath was never unable to exorcise her father, though, because he always came back to her in forms of different men, such as her husband Ted Hughes. Sylvia wrote this poem shortly after Ted left her, and this reminded her of her childhood when her father left her when he passed away. This poem was written at the peak of Plath's love and hatred for her husband and father. In the last 3 lines of the poem she wrote, "Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air." She felt as though she had overcome the sense of abandonment she felt and the pain that the men in her life had caused. Sylvia was not only Lady Lazarus in her poem, but also a true real-life Lady Lazarus.
Lady Lazarus. I have done it again. 1 year in every 10 I manage it, a sort of walking miracle, my skin bright as a Nazi lampshade, my right foot a paperweight, my face a featureless, fine Jew linen. Peel off the napkin, O my enemy. Do I terrify? Yes, yes, Herr Professor, it is I. Can you deny the nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth? The sour breath will vanish in a day. Soon, soon the flesh the grave cave ate will be at home on me, and I a smiling woman. I'm only 30, and like the cat, I have 9 times to die. This is number 3. What a trash to annihilate each decade, what a million filaments. The peanut-crunching crowd shoves in to see them unwrap me hand and foot, the big strip tease. Gentlemen, ladies, these are my hands, my knees. I may be skin and bone, I may be Japanese. Nevertheless, I am the same identical woman. The first time it happened, I was 10. It was an accident. The second time I meant to last it out and not come back at all. I rocked shut as a seashell. They had to call and pick the worms off me like sticky pearls. Dying is an art, like everything else. I do it exceptionally well. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I've a call. It's easy enough to do it in a cell. It's easy enough to do it and stay put. It's the theatrical comeback in broad day to the same place, the same face, the same brute, amused shout, a miracle that knocks me out. There is a charge for the eyeing of my scars. There is a charge for the hearing of my heart. It really goes. And there is a charge, a very large charge, for a word or a touch or a bit of blood or a piece of my hair or my clothes. So, Herr Doctor. So, Herr Enemy. I am your opus. I am your valuable. The pure gold baby that melts to a shriek. I turn and burn. Do not think I underestimate your great concern. Ash, ash, you poke and stir, flesh, bone. There is nothing there, a cake of soap, a wedding ring, a gold filling. Hear God, hear Lucifer, beware, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air.
Daddy. The death of Sylvia's father changed her life forever. Sylvia was overcome with anger, sadness, and confusion when her father died, because she felt as though his death could have been prevented. After he died, Sylvia constantly thought about her father, and she could never quite figure out how to let go of him. In one of her most famous poems titled Daddy, Sylvia attempts to finally put him in the past. The poem uses a lot of imagery involving Nazis and Jews because she wanted to compare her sufferings to the sufferings of the Jews. And this poem is actually very controversial because of that. Critic Irving Howe says that Sylvia Plath tries to enlarge upon the personal plight, give meaning to the personal outcry, by fancying the girl as victim of a Nazi father. Sylvia's father was very strict and controlling, and Sylvia hated him for that, but at the same time she still adored him. In lines 24 through 25, Sylvia writes, "I never could talk to you, the tongue stuck in my jaw." Sylvia was afraid to speak up to her father because of his controlling ways. This poem is Sylvia's way of letting go of her father that controlled her even after his death, and her husband that was unfaithful to her and ended up abandoning her. In lines 57 through 59, Plath writes, "I was 10 when they buried you. At 20 I tried to die and get back to you. This line is obviously about Otto Plath's death and Sylvia's first suicide attempt. Sylvia saying that she tried to kill herself in order to be with him. In line 80, the poem says, "Daddy, Daddy, you bastard, I'm through." This is Sylvia's final statement, not only to her father, but to all the men in her life, saying that she is done with letting them control her.
Daddy. You do not do any more black shoe in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or chew. Daddy, I have had to kill you. You died before I had time, marble heavy, a bag full of God, ghastly statue with one gray toe big as a Frisco seal, and a head in the freakish Atlantic, where it pours bean green over blue in the waters off beautiful Nosset. I used to pray to recover you, ach du, in the German tongue in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, wars, wars. But the name of the town is common. My Polack friend says there are a dozen or two. So I never could tell where you put your foot, your root. I never could talk to you. The tongue stuck in my jaw. It's stuck in a barbed wire snare. Ich, ich. I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you. And the language obscene, an engine, chuffing me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew. The snows of the Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna, are not very pure or true. With my gypsy ancestress and my weird luck, and my Tarok pack, I may be a bit of a Jew. I have always been scared of you, with your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygoo, and your neat moustache, and your Aryan eye, bright blue. Panzerman, oh you, not God, but a swastika, so black no sky could squeak through. Every woman adores a fascist, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. You stand at the blackboard, Daddy, in the picture I have of you, a cleft in your chin instead of your foot. But no less a devil for that, no, not any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. I was 10 when they buried you. At 20 I tried to die and get back to you. I thought even the bones would do. But they pulled me out of the sack, and they stuck me together with glue. And then I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look and a love of the rack and the screw, and I said, I do. So, Daddy, I'm finally through. The black telephone's off at the root. The voices just can't worm through. If I've killed one man, I've killed two. The vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year. 7 years, if you want to know. Daddy, you can lie back now. There's a stake in your fat black heart, and the villagers never liked you. They are dancing and stamping on you. They always knew it was you. Daddy, you bastard, I'm through.
The Bell Jar. Sylvia wrote her best-selling book, The Bell Jar, in 1963. The book is mainly based on Sylvia's own suicide attempt in the summer of 1953 and her experience with her mental illness and the treatment she received at McLean Hospital. The Bell Jar is about Plath's protagonist, Esther Greenwood, who is a college student that travels to New York to work as a guest editor on a magazine. While there, she lives with 11 college girls in a hotel, and she tries to have a good time with everyone, but she feels numb to everything. She spends her last night in New York on a date with a man named Marco who tries to rape her. When Esther returns home to Boston, she realizes she hasn't been accepted to a writing class she wanted to take, so she has to spend the summer with her mother instead. During that time, the strange feelings she felt in New York return, and she becomes unable to eat, sleep, read, and write. Her mother takes her to a psychiatrist who prescribes shock therapy for her. The therapy terrified her and made her feel even worse, so she decides to kill herself. She hides in a crawl space in the basement and takes a lot of sleeping pills. She survives her suicide attempt and is sent to a psychological ward. She meets a psychiatrist named Dr. Nolan who helps Esther slowly get better. After she improves, Esther is released from the hospital feeling like a new woman. The events that occur in the bell jar closely parallel to the events that happened in her life. The book is one of the most obvious examples of how Sylvia's life is reflected in her own works. Sylvia tried to kill herself by overdosing on sleeping pills on August 24, 1953, but once she recovered from it, she felt like a new person, and this is how Esther felt after she recovered. Sylvia also endured shock therapy sessions and went to a psychiatric institution. The ending of the book leaves the reader feeling hopeful about Esther, but sadly, the ending of the bell jar doesn't parallel to the ending of Sylvia's life. Suicide. Suicide was a very important factor in Sylvia's life. Like I've mentioned before, Sylvia attempted to kill herself on August 24, 1953 by overdosing on sleeping pills, but she was found by her mother before she died. On February 11, 1963, Sylvia attempted suicide once more and succeeded in killing herself. She sealed all of the rooms between her and her children and stuck her head in a gas oven. But before doing this, she wrote a note to a man that lived downstairs to call her doctor, but the gas from the oven had leaked through the floor and knocked the man out for several hours. The precise planning of Plath's suicide arouses the belief that she was hoping someone would find her, but sadly death found her before anyone else could. Sylvia may have died at a young age, but her poetry definitely did not, and people still admire her and her words to this very day. As you can see, Sylvia's writings were deeply influenced by the events that occurred in her lifetime and the emotions she felt. Sylvia was overcome with pain, anger, and disappointment during her lifetime, and she reveals these emotions in almost all of her writings. Sylvia poured her heart and soul into everything she wrote, and that's what made her such a remarkable poet.